Emma stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair after a long and exhausting evening. The party at the hotel turned out to be lively, and cocktails flowed like a river. Her face was slightly tired, but she forced herself to smile. A vacation with her husband in Hawaii was supposed to be their salvation, a time to renew their relationship. She straightened her dress and, feeling slightly dizzy, headed down the corridor to return to the room. The corridors of the hotel were almost empty, lit only by the dim light of night lamps. Emma tried to concentrate, counting the room numbers. She felt a little disoriented, but soon walked confidently to a door that seemed familiar to her. After inserting the key, she heard the click of the lock and went inside. The room was in semi-darkness, with only a faint light from the bathroom coming through the half-open door. Emma took off her shoes and walked deeper into the room, intending to quietly get into bed next to her husband. When she approached the bed, someone was already lying on it, and Emma confidently sat down on the edge, gently touching his shoulder. In response, he turned to face her, and at that moment Emma realized that something was wrong. The man lying next to him was a stranger. Her heart skipped a beat and she was momentarily speechless. But instead of jumping up and running, as logic dictated, she froze, peering into his face. "I'm sorry," he said softly, noticing her confusion. "You seem to have the wrong number." His voice was low and soothing. In the darkness, she couldn't make out the contours of his face. It was a stranger, but there was no fear or hostility in his eyes. Emma was about to apologize and leave, but something stopped her. Unexpectedly, she realized that she did not want to leave this room. She whispered, not knowing what to say. He reached out and touched her shoulder, gently, as if to let her know that everything was okay. Emma could feel her heart beating faster. This casual contact, this strange moment in a dim room, caused her to experience a surge of emotions that she had not experienced for a long time. She took a step back, but the stranger suddenly took her hand. His gaze was insistent, but not aggressive. "Maybe you shouldn't leave so soon?" he offered, his voice sounding unexpectedly warm. Emma stood there, torn between the desire to run away and the strange attraction she felt. She knew she had to leave, that it was all wrong, but her body seemed to refuse to obey. She took a step forward, and the man, without letting go of her hand, pulled her closer to him. "We can just talk," he added, seeing her hesitation. This simple phrase turned out to be what broke her resistance. Emma slowly sat down on the bed, feeling her heart still pounding, but no longer from fear, but from the unknown and from what awaits her next. The stranger lay down next to her, his hand remained on her shoulder, but now his touch was barely perceptible, as if he was afraid to scare her away. They talked for a long time, the words flowing like a river, as if they had known each other all their lives. Emma was revealing things to him that she had never even told her husband. His voice was soft. He understood her at a glance, and at that moment it seemed to her that she had met a kindred spirit. The night passed in conversations, but somewhere in the middle of the words began to be replaced by touches. At that moment, Emma felt her mind completely dissolve into the sensual vortex that was rising inside her. Their lips met. Everything around disappeared. Only the two of them remained. His hand slid over her body as if he knew her every wish, her every thought. There was no haste in their movements, only a deep, almost ritualistic tenderness that kindled a fire in their hearts. Every moment was filled with an incredible feeling of closeness and unity, as if their bodies and souls were entwined together. Emma felt waves of pleasure rolling through her body, making her gasp with ecstasy. Everything she knew about the world before seemed pale and insignificant compared to what was happening now. Their bodies moved in perfect harmony, following a rhythm that seemed both endless and exciting. It wasn't just an act of physical intimacy, it was something much more, something that transported them to another world, a world where only the two of them existed. When it was finally over, Emma lay next to him, feeling her breathing gradually calm down, and her heart beat in time with this magical moment for a long time. When the sun began to rise, Emma was lying next to the stranger, staring at the ceiling. She knew that this night would be the beginning of something new. She tiptoed out of the room like a criminal, leaving the stranger and her doubts behind her. Back in my room. Emma was sitting on the balcony of their room. Emma's husband, Ethan, was busy preparing for dinner, unaware of what was going on in her soul. He was engrossed in plans for the evening, discussing with someone on the phone, but his every gesture, every word, seemed to hit Emma in the heart. She knew she had to forget about what had happened, but the memory of the stranger's touch continued to burn her. Ethan suddenly appeared on the balcony with a glass of wine and a slight smile on his face. He was pleased with himself and clearly expected the evening to pass in their usual harmony. "Honey, I have a surprise for you," he said, sitting down next to her. "We're not just going to dinner together. I met an old friend whom I hadn't seen for many years. He's in this hotel too. Can you imagine?" Emma shuddered as she felt her heart stop. She suddenly found it hard to breathe, but she forced herself to smile. "That's great, Ethan," she said, trying to hide the excitement in her voice. "Who is this? Do you remember Robert? We went to college together. I met him at the bar this morning. He invited us to dinner, and I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to remember the old days." Emma nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. The name was unfamiliar to her, but she still felt uneasy. It seemed to her that the world around her was slowly beginning to crumble. However, she decided not to show her excitement and continued the conversation with her husband as if nothing had happened. When they went down to the restaurant, Emma could feel her anxiety growing. An inner voice whispered that tonight could be a turning point. They entered the restaurant, which was already filled with guests, and went to the table in the corner where Robert was waiting for them. As soon as Emma saw the man at the table, her breath caught in her throat. It was him, the stranger from last night. He looked at her with the same surprise, but quickly pulled himself together, smiling at Ethan. "Robert, this is my wife Emma," Ethan introduced her proudly. Robert stood up, smiling affably, but his eyes never left Emma. She tried to hide her confusion by offering her hand to shake. Their fingers touched, and Emma felt an electric shock that pierced her to the very depths of her soul. "Nice to meet you, Emma," Robert said, his voice deep and confident. "Ethan has told me a lot about you." They sat down at the table and a casual conversation began. Ethan recalled the years he and Robert shared in college, telling funny stories, but Emma hardly listened. Her thoughts were confused, and every look Robert gave her made her remember that night. She couldn't believe that all this was happening in reality. Every word, every movement of Robert seemed meaningful to Emma. He didn't make explicit hints, but their gazes constantly crossed, and in those brief moments Emma read much more than she could put into words. She tried to focus on her husband, but all the time her mind was returning to what happened last night. In the middle of dinner, when Ethan was distracted by a conversation with the waiter, Robert took advantage of the moment. He leaned closer to Emma, his voice barely audible, but there was tension in it. "I didn't expect to see you again," he whispered, looking straight into her eyes. "Me too," she replied, her voice just as quiet. "We have to stop this." His gaze was serious. "But something tells me that this is not the end." At that moment, Ethan returned to the table, interrupting their conversation. Emma felt her breath catch in her throat, and she forced herself to smile, plunging back into the conversation, even though her thoughts were far away from here. When dinner came to an end, Robert unexpectedly suggested a walk along the beach. Ethan enthusiastically supported the idea, and the three of them left the restaurant, heading for the shore. The night was warm, the moon shone on their way, and the waves rolled gently on the sand. They walked in silence, each immersed in his own thoughts. Ethan was telling another story, but Emma was barely listening. Her gaze was focused on Robert's figure, which was moving next to her. He didn't try to start a conversation again, but his presence was palpable. Finally, Ethan stopped when he noticed a small cafe on the shore. "Let's stop here and I'll buy us a drink," he suggested, heading inside. Emma and Robert were left alone. The soft moonlight illuminated their faces, and Emma felt the tension between them increase. "Do you really think we can just forget about what happened?" Robert asked, breaking the silence. "I have to," Emma replied, feeling her voice tremble. "This is wrong." "Maybe," he agreed, taking a step closer to her. "But what happened between us can't just be erased." Emma didn't know what to say. She felt the spark between them flare up again, and she knew that she could not resist this attraction. Robert reached out and touched her face, his fingers gently stroking her cheek. "Emma," he whispered, "I can't just let you go." She closed her eyes, trying to collect her thoughts. But all the efforts seemed in vain, because her heart had already made a decision. When she opened her eyes again, she met his gaze, full of determination and passion. They hadn't even taken a step when Ethan returned with drinks in his hands, smiling happily. Emma and Robert stepped back from each other, trying to behave as usual. But something had changed inside Emma. She knew that this evening would be the beginning of something inevitable, something that she would no longer be able to control. It was a particularly hot morning in Hawaii. Emma stood on the balcony of their room, breathing in the salty sea air and looking at the turquoise waves that gently washed the sandy shore. Emotions were still boiling inside her after last night, which had left her in an alarming state of confusion. Robert, the stranger from that night, became something more than just a random mistake. His touch, his looks, his words, it all seemed magical, inevitable, and dangerous. Ethan, as usual, was full of energy and plans for the day. He offered to relax and booked a massage at the hotel spa, inviting Emma to accompany him. She accepted the invitation, although her thoughts were far from calm. The mixture of guilt and attraction she felt for Robert was still bubbling in her soul. She couldn't help but think that Robert might reappear in her life at the most unexpected moment. They were separated at the hotel spa. Ethan was sent to the men's wing, and Emma was sent to the women's wing. Emma entered a small, cozy room with soft lights and quiet, relaxing music. The warm scent of essential oils enveloped her, and for a moment she allowed herself to relax. The scale of events that were happening around her seemed out of place in this setting, and she tried to drown out her restless thoughts by surrendering to the mercy of the massage master. She was greeted by a man, tall and sturdy, with skillful hands and a quiet voice. He invited her to lie down on the massage table, and then began the procedure. The first touches were gentle, soft, gradually turning into deeper movements that relieved tension from the muscles. Emma closed her eyes, allowing herself to be completely absorbed in the process. But as soon as she began to sink into a blissful state, her body tensed. Her intuition kicked in when she heard a familiar voice. "Relax, Emma, I know you love it." Emma's eyes snapped open. It was Robert. He stood over her, his hand sliding lightly down her back, and his voice, that deep, calm voice, plunged her back into a whirlwind of emotions. Emma should have jumped up, run away, screamed, but she couldn't. Her body, as if betraying her, obeyed this voice, these touches. "Like you," she whispered, her voice weak, barely audible. "I knew you'd come here." His voice was low but determined. "And I couldn't miss this chance." His touch was confident but gentle, soothing her, but at the same time kindling a fire in her. Emma felt waves of pleasure wash over her, crowding out common sense. At that moment, there was nothing between them but the tense expectation of what would happen next. "We shouldn't," she whispered, but there was no determination in her voice. "Why?" he asked, continuing the massage. "Who says we have to follow the rules?" Emma didn't know what to say. She lay there, feeling his hand slide over her body, melting the last remnants of resistance. The whole world has narrowed down to this room, to this minute. Her body was responding treacherously to his every touch, and she couldn't fight it anymore. When the massage was over, Emma felt her tension give way to another emotion, burning desire. She knew it was wrong, but she couldn't deny that Robert had been in control of her thoughts and feelings since that night. Robert helped her up from the massage table. His gaze, full of confidence and desire, riveted her to the spot. She knew that if she took one step towards him, she would cross a line that would be impossible to return. "We have to stop," Emma whispered, but her voice was shaking. Robert bent down slowly, his lips almost touching her ear. "Are you sure that's what you want?" His words sounded like a challenge, like an offer that could not be refused. Emma felt her will melting under the onslaught of this temptation. She tried to resist, but her body betrayed her desires. At that moment, the door to the room suddenly opened, and Ethan appeared in the doorway, his face lit up with a joyful smile. "Emma, is everything okay?" She jerked away from Robert, as if she had been caught doing something illegal. Ethan, not noticing anything suspicious, continued to talk about how great his massage was, and suggested that we go have a cocktail by the pool. Robert didn't seem at all embarrassed by what was happening. He just smiled at Emma, saying goodbye to both of them and leaving her even more confused. She read the promise in his eyes. Their story wasn't over yet. Ethan took her hand and they left the spa together, but the storm was still raging in Emma's soul. Her world was on the verge of destruction, and she felt that the events of this chapter of their lives would be the beginning of something much more dangerous and unpredictable. Emma leaned against the cold metal railing and looked out at the sea, which stretched out in front of her, lost in the vastness of the horizon. The sun's rays caressed her skin, but a storm raged inside her, causing icy goosebumps down her spine. Yesterday's events did not let her go. Massage, Robert, his quiet voice and confident hands. All this continued to torment her mind, causing a conflict of feelings and guilt. Ethan, her husband, didn't suspect anything. He was busy with his new hobby, surfing. Getting up early in the morning, he set off to conquer the waves, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts. She usually loved such moments of solitude, but today they seemed painful to her. Robert did not leave her mind, and his presence was felt so acutely that it seemed he was standing next to her on the balcony. Emma tried to switch to something else. She took out her phone, opened her email, read several messages from colleagues, but it all seemed pointless. Putting down her phone, she decided to go down to the pool to distract herself and plunge into the calm atmosphere of the resort. The pool was almost empty. Several tourists were swimming in the water, and couples were relaxing on the sunbeds, enjoying a sunny day. Emma chose an empty place by the water and settled down on a chaise longue. She closed her eyes, trying to let go of all her worries, but before she could relax, she heard a familiar voice. "Hello." She opened her eyes and saw Robert. He stood in front of her, a slight smile on his face, but there was determination in his eyes. Emma felt her insides tighten. She tried to suppress the panic that flared up, but her heart began to beat faster. "Hi," she replied, trying to stay calm. "Are you here on business or just decided to swim?" "I decided to take a little rest," Robert replied, sitting down on a nearby chaise longue. "You look tense." "Everything is fine." Emma turned away, not wanting him to notice her embarrassment. She didn't know how to react to his presence. Yesterday's incident at the spa had left her confused, and she wasn't ready to meet Robert again. "It's okay," she lied, trying not to look him in the eye. "I'm just a little tired." Robert seemed to realize that her words did not reflect reality. He got up and walked to the edge of the pool, putting his feet in the water. "Do you want to swim?" he offered, looking at Emma. She hesitated. Her mind kept telling her that it would be best to refuse and leave, but her body seemed to make the decision on its own. Emma got up from the chaise longue and walked over to Robert. They entered the water together, and the coolness of the pool brought her back to clarity for a moment. But it was short-lived. Robert began to swim next to her, their hands occasionally accidentally touching each other, causing Emma even more confusion. She could feel the tension between them growing, but she didn't know how to defuse it. They were silent, letting the water wash over their bodies, as if each hoped that the water would wash away the feelings that were accumulating between them with every passing moment. Finally, Robert broke the silence. "Emma, I can't stop thinking about you. It's wrong, but I can't help myself." His words hit her like an electric shock. Emma froze, staring at him, not knowing what to say. She felt that what was going on between them was beyond all reason, but her heart refused to admit it. "We have to stop," she whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. Robert was looking at her with such determination that Emma knew he wasn't going to give up. He came closer, their faces were almost on the same level, and his hand gently touched her cheek. "Maybe we should," he agreed. "But this is not happening. We both know that." Emma closed her eyes, feeling his touch. She knew she had to leave, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. Everything that happened between them seemed so wrong, but at the same time so inevitable. Suddenly, Emma felt all her doubts and fears begin to dissolve in that moment. Robert took a step forward and their lips met. It was a gentle, barely noticeable kiss, but it was full of passion and forbidden desire. Emma couldn't resist any longer. Her arms wrapped around his neck, and she drowned in that kiss, forgetting about everything except the two of them. They kissed again, deeper and more passionately. Emma felt her heart pounding so hard that it seemed like it was about to burst out of her chest. At that moment, all that mattered was Robert, his touch and his kisses. But their moment was disrupted. Emma pulled away abruptly when she heard a noise behind her. She turned around and saw Ethan standing at the edge of the pool, holding a surfboard in his hands. His face was full of surprise, but there was something else in his eyes, something that made Emma go cold. "What's going on here?" "What is it?" he asked. His voice was firm, but there was a subtle note of disbelief in it. Emma felt her whole body tense up. Robert took a step back, leaving her alone with her husband. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to explain what was happening. Her world began to crumble, and Emma realized that this moment could be the beginning of the end of their relationship. But Ethan, to her surprise, didn't make a scene. He came closer and looked at Robert with a cold expression on his face. "You know my wife, don't you?" "What is it?" he asked, his voice strained but calm. Robert held his gaze, showing no emotion. "We were just talking," he replied, his voice calm, but there was tension in it. Ethan turned to Emma. She saw pain mixed with disappointment in his eyes. She knew she had to explain, that she had to tell him the truth, but the words stuck in her throat. Ethan didn't wait for an answer. He turned around and headed out of the pool, leaving Emma and Robert alone. Emma stood there, feeling her heart slowly being torn apart. She knew she had gone too far, that this new experience she had gained could destroy everything she had been building for so long. When Robert approached her again, she did not push him away. But she didn't respond to his touch either. They left the pool together, but every step was difficult for her. After that unfortunate moment in the pool, Emma and Ethan barely spoke. The tension between them was growing by the minute, but they both avoided open conflict, as if they were afraid that it would destroy them to the end. Robert seemed to disappear like a ghost, leaving her alone with her thoughts and feelings. But she knew that this calm moment was just the calm before the storm. Emma and Ethan were going to spend their last evening in Hawaii at a quiet restaurant on the beach. Ethan suggested it, trying to bring back at least a shadow of their former harmony. Emma agreed, although her heart was heavy. She couldn't shake the feeling that their evening was going to be more than just a farewell dinner. The restaurant was cozy, lit by soft candlelight. They were sitting at a table on the veranda overlooking the sea. Ethan ordered wine, but seemed to have completely lost interest in the conversation. They sat in silence, each lost in his own thoughts. When their food arrived, Ethan finally spoke. "Emma, I want to talk to you frankly." She felt her heart skip a beat, but she nodded, bracing herself for the fact that she was about to hear the truth she had been running away from for so long. "I know something's going on," Ethan began, not taking his eyes off his wine glass. "The last few days. You've changed. I do not know what happened, but I feel that you have distanced yourself from me." Emma started to say something, but Ethan raised his hand to stop her. "Wait, let me finish." His voice was quiet, but there was a firmness in it. "I thought about it and came to the conclusion that we have two ways. First, we can try to forget about what happened and return to our lives as if nothing had happened." His eyes met hers, and Emma saw the depth of his pain in them. "And the second one," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan was silent for a moment, as if he was considering every word before saying, "The second way is the truth. The complete and unbearable truth. And I'm ready to hear it if you're ready to say it." Emma knew that this moment had come. She couldn't hide what had happened from Ethan anymore. She felt like she couldn't live a lie anymore, but the truth was too hard to say. "Ethan," she began, trying to hold back the tears that were coming to her eyes, "I made a mistake. A huge mistake." Ethan listened intently without interrupting her. Emma told him about everything, about the night with Robert, about how a chance meeting turned into something more, how she couldn't resist this attraction. Her words were full of pain and remorse, but she knew that this was the only way she could get rid of this burden. When she finished, Ethan was silent. Emma felt her world crumbling before her eyes. She expected him to explode, scream, accuse her, but his reaction was completely different. He just sat there, looking at her, and there was no anger in his eyes, but a deep, piercing sadness. "I knew," he said finally, his voice low and somehow tired. "I knew from the very beginning." Emma stared at him dumbfounded, not understanding what he meant. "Did you know?" "What is it?" she asked, her voice full of disbelief. Ethan sighed and took a sip of wine. "I knew about you and Robert. I saw you the night you came back to the wrong room." Emma felt the ground give way beneath her feet. "Did he know? All this time? Why didn't you say anything?" She couldn't believe her ears. "Because I love you," he replied simply. "And I was hoping it was just a mistake, that you'd come back to me. But now I realize that you are no longer mine." Tears began to flow down her cheeks, and Emma felt her whole being filled with pain and guilt. She couldn't believe that Ethan knew about everything and had been trying to keep their relationship going all this time, despite her betrayal. "Ethan, She wanted to apologize, but the words stuck in her throat. Ethan put his hand on her arm, and his touch was so warm, so familiar, that she felt her heart break apart. "Don't, Emma," he whispered. "I don't hold a grudge against you. But I think we need to break up." Those words hit her like a knife. Break up. She couldn't believe he was saying that. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her voice filled with despair. "I know," he replied, his voice soft but determined. "But I can't live with this pain either. You have to go your own way, and I have to go mine." Emma didn't know what to say. Everything inside her screamed that this was wrong, that they should try to save their marriage, but she knew Ethan was right. They had both lost each other a long time ago, and all that remained was to admit the truth and move on. When they returned to the hotel, Emma felt like her heart was broken into 1,000 pieces. She stood at the window of their room, looking out at the night sea, and felt that her life would never be the same. Ethan packed up his things and left without saying goodbye, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Emma watched his figure disappear into the darkness and felt tears fill her eyes again. But she knew it was the right move. She has lost a lot, but perhaps this loss will give her a chance to start all over again. And when the door closed behind Ethan, Emma turned to the window and saw the first star appear on the horizon. She knew that she had a long and difficult path ahead of her, but now that it was over, she was finally ready to start a new life, free from lies and betrayal.